Okie doke. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to start off here in a second with this week's solar news. But and does anybody have anything they want to bring up during the call? I see Eric just joined. I've got your thing here about solar financing. Bob, I've got your thing about commercial versus residential. Don, Ben, do you guys have anything you wanted to raise today?
Nothing in particular, but give it time.
Okay, yeah. Well, if we get into politics, I know Don will have something to say about. So, all right. Well, let me jump into the solar news here. The North Carolina Supreme Court just ruled this week that homeowners associations cannot prohibit their members from installing solar on their home. And they are allowed to put in reasonable restrictions, but reasonable restrictions do not include prohibiting solar or making you put it on the north side of your house, which apparently is something they were doing. So, so the court has ruled there. They're one of 26 states that have laws on the books that say homeowners associations can't come in and try and prohibit you from installing solar. There's a new piece of software that was tested down in Orlando, Florida, called SoulShare, which seems like it could be quite an interesting thing. And I'm sure there will be other things out there that are similar, but it's 100% behind the meter solution for multiple users using a single solar array. So what this is designed for is apartment buildings, primarily, where they want to allocate a solar array to multiple tenants at that apartment building. Now, this particular apartment building had 296 units. So when I looked at their website, it's essentially a piece of hardware and software that takes the production from the inverter and then reallocates it to all of the participating meters within the building. So it kind of branches it off as if it were multiple arrays, but it's a single array that's being fed off to multiple meters. So this then would not require any participation by the utility to agree to any kind of, shared tenant facility. Like it's like a very small community solar system, but it's all behind the meter. So that sounded like quite an interesting piece of technology that might have some impact, considering there are about 22 million apartment units in the United States. And a lot of those have been, dark to the solar world because of utilities causing problems trying to get them connected. There's a new California interconnection ruling. And apparently, yeah, Bob, you had a question there? You're on mute, Bob.
People listen to me better when I'm on mute.
Yeah.
What was the name of that system that you said?
Yeah, it's called SoulShare, SOLSHARE, SoulShare. Okay, the California interconnection ruling. When you have a utility scale or a large system that you want to connect to the utility, you've got to go through an interconnection process evaluation. And they typically have fast track systems and then longer, more detailed evaluations. And California's rule had what they called the 15% peak load ruling, which basically meant if your system was large enough that it exceeded 15% of the capacity of the line that you're trying to connect to, you had to go through this, this more complex evaluation. People argued that that was a bit arbitrary, caused some of the smaller systems to have to go through lengthy process. Just to give you a sense of the time involved, there was a study by NREL back in 2015 that found that an interconnection process took on average about 62 days. Today, Lawrence Berkeley Labs said the average utility scale now takes 3.7 years for the utility to evaluate. So by going through the short-term process, you can speed that up considerably. Now what they're saying is they're going to use the 90% rule, which is essentially saying that if your project does not use more than 90% of the available capacity, then you don't have to go through the evaluation process. A little bit technical, but at least some of these utilities, some of the states are trying to make connecting to the grid a little bit more, less timely. Speaking of utilities, there's a thing called the capacity market, where apparently utilities go in and they buy power from generators like 3 years in advance. And PJM or PJM just had theirs. That's the area that's like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, goes up to Chicago. And the prices are 32% lower than they were last year for the electric that's being charged to the utilities. So it will be interesting to see if any of these savings get passed along to consumers. I wouldn't hold my breath, but the utilities are basically paying a third less for the power that they're having to purchase from generators. And one of the things about this capacity market is if you're a generator and you don't sell, let's say you have power to offer, but it doesn't sell, that's usually one of the things that sparks the closing of that generating unit. So a lot of the coal power plants, what they had on offer didn't sell to the utility. So there'll probably be another round of coal power plant shutdowns. Most of the cost savings are coming from renewable energy being added to the grid. What they're saying is there's a lot of new capacity, not a lot of change in demand. So as a result, the prices are going down. So as we would expect, although utilities don't seem to want to pass that along. And then this was one of an interesting story I ran across in a utility document. West Virginia is proposing punishing a number of large banks for what they refer to as biases against the fossil fuel industry. So the state of West Virginia is saying that the banks, BlackRock, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, and US Bank have to prove to the state that they are not biased against fossil fuel companies. Otherwise, they will not be able to participate in state contracts. So that's interesting. So that's Joe Manchin land is showing their intelligence. Apparently, it's a reaction to these companies saying that they wanted to promote the financing of net zero projects that are out there. So that's the news this week. Not a lot going on other than same old, same old. I had a couple of things. Eric had contacted me this week with an item I'll bring up, and Bob and Devanand. I don't see Devanand on the call right now, but anyway, did anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up this week from the world of solar that you've been running into in your life? Give you just a second. Okay, so Bob, why don't we start with you? You were bringing up about getting some inquiries from commercial and industrial customers, wanted to know what you should expect differently than when you're dealing with your residential customers.
Yeah, I have some leads here. One person is owns an office building, which he pays the electric bill for the total units, but charges them on the rent, but he wants to go solar. I also have a restaurant that is looking at the same thing to go solar. So I just think you just take the residential and you flatten it out on the roof, right?
Yeah, that's just that simple. So, yeah, I can give you a few things that I'm aware of, but before I do that, what does anybody who's out there in the world of commercial have any insights for Bob? Issues that have arisen in your world if you're doing this? Give you guys first right here. Okay, well, a couple of the things, Bob. Now, as you say, often you're going to be dealing with ballasted roofs, so that's easy enough. Site access and site disruption is usually going to be an issue with the larger systems, where it's not usually an issue with your residential, because a lot of times these people are open for business and don't want to be disturbed, as much as possible. Another thing is the number of people you've got to communicate with as the project goes forward. You're going to have different departments involved, people that you're going to have to keep informed and keep happy. There may be financial institutions that are involved that have specific issues that they, like they're not going to release money until you've demonstrated that the project is X far along in its process. I don't know how big the project is, but that's usually for larger systems that are being financed by somebody. What's some of the other issues? I know one thing that some companies that I've dealt with here in Ohio have run into is when they do get a really large project, and then it tends to concentrate risk. If you're on the hook for a lot of money and they don't pay you, it's enough to put a number of companies out of business, where let's say they've got a huge contract and then that person doesn't pay, their cash flow issues, as opposed to having lots of little contracts. So that's something to worry about. I know you were talking before the call about getting paid up front, things like that, but that may or may not be possible, with a larger project.
Well, if it's put into an escrow account,
Yeah,
then I probably would go for something like that, but I'll tell you, you leave it up to the buyer, where if he can say one sentence to you, which is, I'm not going to pay you, so talk to my lawyer.
Yeah.
And get out of, many dollars. I've had that happen to me too many times. So I'm not a financial institution. So what do you think about going into an escrow account and having them determine that it meets a certain requirements at the end?
Yeah, well, you're outside my area of expertise.
Hey, Don, what you doing? You listening?
Yeah, Don's our accountant.
Who, I guess, Bob, whose question is going to be, who are you going to get to be the escrow agent, and what are the terms? I mean, like Jay was saying, typically they're going to have, like when I've built stuff before, the bank or whoever is holding the money says, okay, show me you've met this criteria. You got the panel sitting there, or you've got, the panels put up, or there's different criteria. I'm just curious, it will add cost because you'll have to have an escrow agent, but do you have somebody you think the bank or somebody or some other escrow agent that would act to, I agree, they'd be more objective than somebody just say in Chicago saying, I'm not going to pay you, go to hell.
And they do that all the time.
They don't do that as much here, but I'm sure, I used to live in Chicago. I'm sure that's probably an accurate statement.
Yeah, and they pat themselves on the back and look at bragging rights, what they got out of. I mean, it's terrible.
Yeah.
No, a bank is what I'm thinking about, because if they have to have any financing done within it, but my terms are very simple: cash in advance. I'm not a finance company.
And cash in advance, I think, is the other side of that coin. I'm not going to pay you anything, all cash in advance. They seem to be,
Yeah.
Well, there's this thing called a contract that we go under.
Agree.
And the contract does hold me to certain standards and certain requirements in it. So
Yeah, I think in project management, often they'll refer to them as key project
Milestones.
indicators, KPIs. And you may find the finance people will say, as Don said, okay, once you've demonstrated materials have arrived on site, we'll release the money for the materials. Then once you've demonstrated that X percentage of the panels are functioning, we'll release the money for the installation thing, and they'll have these different milestones and indicators that allow for them to release money through the process. Usually with a commercial, they'll get some sort of development loan, construction loan, and then they'll have to go after permanent financing, afterwards, after that's gone through its process. So, I mean, that's transparent, hopefully, to you, because you don't really care what they're doing as far as financing, other than you want to get paid. So,
It seems to me that a commercial person will come to installer and say, put some solar panels on my roof and they'll take care of me. Well, you've got significant restrictions on the roof because of fire laws. So your area that you have may be cut down. Some restaurants may have odd shaped roofs for whatever purpose. A building may be 3 stories tall. So you've got 4 floors worth of people to provide electricity for, but only 1 floor of roof to provide electricity for. Seems to me that the place that you have an area to expand to is a parking lot. If you can convince your apartment owner or your restaurant owner that you can go out out to the parking lot, either to the edge or in the middle, and put up shade, you may be able to get your size system in that will work for him. Otherwise, his roof may not work too well.
Yeah, restrictions like that are always going to be an issue that you'll have to address in your site survey. And you can put Tony's charging stations out in the parking lot, in the canopies, and that kind of thing. Of course, it's going to be more expensive than a typical rooftop system because you're building the structure of the canopy as well. But yeah, I think all of those things, another thing I was going to mention to you, in the past, there's always been like one large central inverter and then you key off of that. But there is a movement towards multiple smaller systems, where you're integrating essentially multiple residential systems into a commercial environment. So you might have 6 or 8 different inverters, each one with, say, 10 kW capacity or something like that instead of a 60 kW inverter. And that's something that you might want to consider just because you're more comfortable with the smaller size things, but also it gives a redundancy. So you don't have one point of failure, out there. So something to consider, at least as you start moving into larger systems and more commercial things, is think about it instead of just 4 or 5 residential systems connected together, as an option.
Well, that sort of opens the door to another situations. But when I'm out quoting jobs, I'm quoting with micro inverters, not string inverters.
Yeah.
And what happens is I've lost a couple customers, one especially to Tesla. And I was head to head financially with them. They don't do their own job, so they subcontracted it out. And the guy got a racking system that was non-existent, and he got a string inverter instead of micro inverters. So they signed contracts without looking at what kind of system they're buying.
Yeah. Well, and they're probably not that familiar with the advantages or disadvantages of the different systems. But you will find microinverters are going to be more cost up front, especially as the system gets bigger.
Yeah,
so
but, on a roof with no trees or shading or issues like that, then I can just go to a string inverter and go to it direct without.
Bob, isn't that the salesman's job to educate the customer?
It's a salesman's job to go in and not leave without getting the customer to sign the contract.
I understand that too. Well, that's just one way to do it.
The used car salesman technique. That's
the worst is try to buy a mattress. Try to walk out of a mattress without signing something.
Okay. All right. I'm going to jump on. Hopefully that gives you some guidance. In the book that I sent you, the commercial book, I know in chapter 1 and 2 talks about some of the differences between the commercial and residential and what to expect. Okay, Eric, do I see you still? Yep, there you go. Yeah, solar financing issues. So tell us what your issue was and where you were from on that.
Let's see, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So getting a little disenfranchised. The more I look into it, the more I find out that this game is rigged. It's just like the darn, tariffs with China. There's all this misdirection going on. We have all these great programs, but there is no education to tell people where it's at. And then when you actually go and try and do it, they make you jump through all these hoops. And then ultimately programs are discontinued or they change the laws. And now, the game has changed. So, so I really haven't found anything. I was led to believe that, we would be able to use PACE financing. So, that goes on your property tax. But that is only for commercial, and small businesses.
And it's only in some jurisdictions. It's not everywhere.
Right. Exactly. And then you hear about this EcoLink loan that's supposed to be, subsidized by, some municipality, whether it's county or city. Well, I find out that the banks don't even do it anymore. So now you're back to, you got to get a, some kind of home equity line or something like that off your home.
You might check with Key Bank. The last I heard, Key Bank is doing EcoLink. Are they not doing it now?
Nope, not anymore. That's what they told me. They do like a home equity line now.
Really?
Yeah.
Because my understanding is that it's a state program, a state of Ohio program, and all the bank's supposed to fill out the paperwork. So apparently,
I heard from the bank guy they weren't really making any money on it, so they stopped doing it.
Yeah. Yep.
So then, and then I tried other things like, going do like some home efficiency, energy efficiency programs. And, once again, those, go through like, you have to work with, some electric utility or the gas company. And once again, they don't make that stuff known. They give you the opportunity of getting a rebate, but you have to go through their program and you have to use their specialized contractors. So it ends up being really expensive. So the rebate you get really doesn't even pay, for your hassle. You might as well just go ahead and insulate your roof yourself,
Yeah.
Or insulate your attic or put insulation in your walls, through a contractor. You could probably do some of the work for yourself, cheaper than trying to get money from somebody else,
Right. Well, let me see. I know Bob's got his hand up and Bill Dorset. So Bob, I know you have some feedback.
I went down that rabbit hole myself and looked at all of the alternatives. And what I found was home equity was the way. And I found that if I go,
what was the way?
Home equity loans, second mortgages on your house. Now, I found that if I go to Chase, they'd be glad to take a huge amount of closing costs on you. But if you go to a credit union, a local credit union, and join them, I paid on one of home equity $250 closing cost at a credit union. And also I got a 3.99% loan on that. The other end of that is Mosaic, who's out of California, who does solar. And as an installer, they want 15 to 17% of my gross upfront as a payoff. So I have the honor of going to the customers on their behalf and sell them to the customers. But they guarantee me that when my customer gets a loan, the check is made out to me, not made out to the customer who's having the loan. So
15%?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And that's not
Go.
unusual. There's some national programs
Oh, is
out
it?
there
Okay.
that tout themselves as financing for solar, and they're like, yeah, 15 to 20%
Wow.
upfront.
And I have to say, Mosaic is owned and run by a woman. So you're telling me woman power. A very rich woman.
Okay, hey, Bill, you had a question or an answer?
Yes. Hey, and it's both a question and a comment. Bob, you commented about credit unions, and I wanted to find out if anybody in the group has experience working with the Clean Energy Credit Union in Colorado.
No.
Mm-mm.
It's one of 2 credit unions that were approved maybe 4 years ago. And it's, nationally recognized and accredited. And they only finance renewable energy projects, probably residential as opposed to commercial. But I do know that they finance all kinds of PV systems, efficiency, electric vehicles, a whole range of different projects. And it's the Clean Energy Credit Union. It takes very little to sign in. I have a number of friends who've used them to finance projects just for the experience of seeing how they work. And so far, I've only got good experiences.
Okay, well,
Awesome.
that's a good resource. Thanks.
Some of these places only will deal with their state and not to go to other states.
I think this is national.
Okay. All right,
And
great.
what's the name of it?
Clean
It was
energy.
the Clean Energy Credit Union.
Akshar, did you have a question? I see a hand there.
Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Oh, okay. No, sorry. Yeah, that was actually my cursor was a hand on your tile. Okay, I moved it there. It's like, oh, okay. All right. Yeah, okay. So that's good. I know financing is gonna always be an issue. I was just gonna make a comment too, Eric, some of the frustration, especially when you're dealing with government programs. We ran into this with a fence thing on our farm. And oh my God, after 5 years of jumping through their paperwork, and they had lost the papers like 6 times. And finally, they only approved certain people. And by the time it was done, they were supposed to pay 3/4 of the cost. It ended up being they paid like 30% of the cost, took 5 years. We would have been better off just simply doing it ourselves and avoiding them altogether. And it was a nightmare. It's enough to turn me move to Kentucky and live with Don and join the Republican Party down there. So
It's very extreme. It must be, yeah.
I must have told
I'm not
I must
sure
have
that
told
would be
Annie a
good.
dozen times, this is going to turn me into a Republican, by God, so so it's good intentions gone wrong, right? Which is basically the slogan of the Democratic Party, good intentions gone wrong. So.
Well, I would say that there's some nice work being done by Republicans in Ohio too. I mean, that 826 was like some pretty sneaky stuff,
Sure. Okay, and I see Devin and you just joined us. We're going through some of the issues that were raised this week, and I know you had sent me the note about the IEEE 1547 inverter issues. And for those who aren't familiar, IEEE 1547 deals with distributed energy systems integrating within the grid. And they did define a lot of what we would refer to as smart inverter requirements. So was my answer helpful at all to you?
Well, it seems we were looking to do a project in the island of St. Vincent. And when I reached out to the St. Vincent Power Company, they told me that they were updating their code requirements. And they told us the inverters that they want to more or less have on their utility line must be to satisfy the issues surrounding inverter interaction with the grid. And they tell me to look at that standard, and if the inverter could do those things, I asked the question, I see, well, if you have any brand of inverters that complies with these things, they can give me a definite answer. So I know I look at the SA standards, seeing that they are reactive, they react about reactive power and everything like that. Voltage right through, injection of reactive power, absorbing. And I'm hoping that the SA that they tell me about, one of those inverters might be the requirement. So basically, they just tell me send the data sheet back to them, and any if there's any supporting documents from the manufacturer of the inverter saying that these things will meet the requirement. They did send me an email afterwards with some of the issues that when the inverter connects to their grid, in terms of the testing and the issues of voltage and current and tripping and stuff like that, to look at these things. These are things that obviously I never saw in the inverter before.
Okay,
So I know I was looking to see if there's a test report from the manufacturer that goes in more details with these sort of issues. So that's why I sent it to you. I was kind of a little feeling around in the dark for that a bit.
yeah, my understanding is these issues that were raised, what they're talking about were similar to what was raised in California Rule 21, which were dealing with the utilities interaction and what happens when you start to get a certain concentration of distributed systems on the grid and how it can adversely impact the grid. So they were looking at soft startup so that not everybody starts 5 minutes after the grid goes down and you crash the grid again. They were
Yeah.
looking about, the ability of voltage ride through or
Mhm.
things of that nature where they're not so cut and dry. They can have some give and take, and they can clean up the power a little bit. Well, my understanding is that was the purpose of the addendum to the UL 1741 evaluation process. So when an inverter is tested and found in compliance with 1741 SA, it meets all of the smart inverter requirements.
Okay.
And it's also my understanding that pretty much every inverter that's being manufactured today is tested to the UL 1741 SA. Where it comes into play is not every utility is requiring that you have the smart inverter. Our utility, for example, doesn't even know what a smart inverter is. They're still wondering what an inverter is. So what I was able to do is buy some discontinued product line and install it on my system because it was cheap. And my utility did not require the SA, the 1741 SA. So if I were in an area that did require it, I couldn't buy a remaindered inverter or a used inverter or something like that. I'd have to go out and get one of the new inverters. So it just sounds like St. Vincent, you said, is
Yeah, St. Vincent Nicholas.
yeah, they're a little bit ahead of, well, certainly ahead of Athens or Zanesville, Ohio, when it comes to technology. So
Their electrical wiring is based upon the British standards. So they use 400 volts, 3-phase, 230 volts, 115 volts, split phase, single phase, along those lines. And they operate at the 50 hertz lines.
Okay. Does anybody else have any different perspective on the smart inverter issue or the IEEE 1547? I know 1547 deals with other things too, but it did raise the issue of inverters. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any items you want to bring up before I get into the thing that Tony had sent me? I'll get Bill, go ahead.
Yes, I have an older in-phase system, and a number of them are not working. And in the past, I've got them replaced under warranty. My envoy is not working, although I could look and see whether I could make that go. I was wondering whether anybody, I'm faced with, well, not only that, I decommissioned one solar array that was maybe 12 panels. So I have a bunch of inverters sitting around. And I suppose I'll go out and look and see which ones aren't working and replace them with working inverters. But in terms of warranty replacement with in-phase, does anybody have any experience with that? I mean, you probably did the right thing and got them replaced when they stopped working. And I've been lax in that area. Just comments.
Yeah,
I've
I mean,
had
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I've had very good experience with Enphase sending out replacement inverters. Quick, I've only had one refused, and it was the inverter. We switched panels on the inverter. They tried to push it off on the panel, but it wasn't. We've had very good experience with Enphase. They're switching the new inverters or the bad ones for IQ7 inverters, and they have a particular adapter that will fit your old trunk line. And so it's the new technology, it's the IQ technology, but it will adapt to the 4-line plug-in trunk cable.
Yeah, I had similar experience with mine. You just go on to the Envoy, what do they call that? Anyway, the online monitoring, and you can simply report. There's a button there, you say report an issue, and it'll ask you which inverter is out. They did the evaluation of it remotely. And then they just sent me an email saying, yep, send it on in. They said, we'll send you a replacement. When you receive it, send us the old one. And they gave a prepaid box. It all happened perfectly. And as Bill mentioned, when I got the new one, because mine were the M215s, the one that went bad, they sent me an IQ7. And I was thinking, man, I want all my inverters to go bad, because now I'm getting brand new inverters, and it does work better. I mean, when I monitor it, it's doing better than the old inverters. So it was seamless. It was not a problem for me.
Yeah.
The big problem I've heard from installers is it's a hassle. I mean, you got to go out and swap out the inverter. So, yeah, Bob?
Yeah, two things. First of all, if you take a look as an installer, and there's a cost of sending a guy out there, getting on the roof and replacing it and stuff like that. Enphase has a conditional labor warranty in there that doesn't seem to be working very well at all. And it's very limited in scope. So they'll be glad to give you a new one, but you got to put it in yourself at your cost and stuff.
Yeah, my system is a ground mounted system, so it was pretty simple. I mean, it was a 10-minute exchange thing where you go out, turn everything off, unclip it, clip the new one in. So dead simple. But it's going to be the one in the middle of the array that goes bad. So you're going to have to remove all the panels and get at it and do all of that.
Well, the second thing I wanted to bring up was an apology to Matt over there in Texas for us to give our blue state viewpoints over here, which is not correct. I want Matt to come back, and I want him to know that I'm a God-fearing Christian and a veteran, and we hold a lot of the same values as you do. So take us with a grain of salt and come on back.
Even in Chicago?
What?
I said, even in Chicago?
Even in Chicago. Well, there's got to be one.
Chicago. Jesus is alive in Chicago.
Yeah.
Hey, I would like to comment.
Forget about it.
I would like to comment that that we've had, and I don't know how many hundred IQ inverters we've got out there at this point, but we have a large number of IQ inverters, and we've had zero problems with any of them.
Really?
I think we had an IQ6. I think we had an IQ6 that went bad. It was an infant mortality, maybe a week after we installed the array, and everything else that we've ever installed has been working flawlessly.
Well, that's great to hear. I know that one of the early on, people complained a lot about the M215s from Enphase, that there were a lot of issues there. Seemed to go away with the M250s, but it sounds like then the IQs doing even better. Bill, have you installed any IQ8s? Have you had any experience with those? I know they're brand new.
We're only getting into them now, so I have no time. I mean, nobody has any track record with them at this point, but so far they've gone in very easily. I still haven't gotten into the batteries or the controllers or other parts of them. We're simply using them very much like we did IQ7 Plus.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'd be curious to find out if there are issues. For those who aren't aware, the IQ8s will allow for usage without batteries when the sun is shining. They can be set up to provide power, battery-less power. But I just have to believe that there are going to be issues there because they will only produce as much power as sunlight that's available.
Yeah. How does that work, Jay? I mean, if the clouds come down, there's all of a sudden everything going to brown out and then come back.
Yeah.
I mean,
supposedly the controller is supposed to, you hook up, if I remember right, like 3 different circuits you can hook up and they're prioritized. So if it loses power, it'll kill one circuit first, then the second one, then the third one.
Okay,
but
so
then
it's like a step function. If it goes down below, then it drops off, and then it
and then it
off
would
again
have
like a
to
step?
it'd have to reconnect after the sun is restored. So
Okay.
if you've got, and people's behaviors, they're going to be upset, they're going to be confused, so without a battery, there's going to be issues. You just know there are going to be issues. So
there is a separate piece of hardware that you need to buy, and the wholesale price on it is right in the range of $475, something like that. It's a load controller.
Yeah.
And basically it's a series of relays that will disconnect, like Jay was just mentioning. It'll just prioritize circuits and disconnect as the system browns out. But the system can be overloaded and then shut down. And I don't know what the mechanism, in terms of the hysteresis between shutting down and reconnecting and shutting down and reconnecting, if that's going to cause certain circuits to be overused and possibly fail early. I don't know.
Yeah. And is that integrated in with a transfer switch for the disconnection, or is that a separate piece of equipment?
It's a separate piece of equipment.
Yeah, because it seemed to me that was like a $2,000 investment for that transfer switch, which seemed pretty hefty. So, Ben, I see your hands up. Do you have a comment there?
There we go. Yeah, I'm just thinking of the electronics or whatever equipment is plugged into the thing, because it's one thing for it to turn on, turn off, but I'm thinking like, what is plugged into that? So is that my refrigerator? Is that my deep freeze? Is that, what is that appliance, and how is that gonna do when, we get cloud?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the theory behind it, of course, is you've got a solar array. And if you've got a prolonged outage, here's this array that's not generating anything. And so the theory behind it's good. I just think that in practice, 9 times out of 10 at least, you're going to have batteries associated with it. If somebody's going to spend the money for, the automatic transfer switch and the controller and all of that other thing, they're probably going to throw some batteries in, which evens a lot of this out. But they do advertise it as it has the option of operating without batteries, which, is going to be complex.
So it's going to be a hook that gets somebody looking at the upsell of batteries on it too.
Yeah, and I think it's working. It's certainly working because the Enphase battery system is one of the best-selling battery systems in the country. So, and it is kind of all proprietary with Enphase. So you got to buy a system that all communicates and works together. I think it's probably a good product. I've looked at it myself since I have microinverters. But the problem there is, of course, the older microinverters are not forwardly compatible with a lot of this stuff. So that becomes a bit of an issue. And I just wonder if that's going to be translated through other equipment in this industry, because we've traditionally said, all right, I've got a solar panel. Well, it didn't really matter. I can add a different inverter, or I can add a different, we're assuming things are kind of forwardly compatible, but that may or may not be the case, moving forward. You might have to replace a bunch of stuff, like all my inverters, which would be a shame. So, unless I can manage to break them all and then I get them replaced with IQ7s, then I'm compatible. So I don't know, maybe there's a clever way of doing that.
I'm thinking that most of the time your electricity goes out, it's going to be bad weather. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of this is more looking towards the times where you have extended power outages. You know, like maybe ice storms that knock out, or you know, Houston. We got a couple of people from Houston. You get a hurricane that comes through, and yeah, during the hurricane it's bad weather, but then for the 2 weeks after, while you're sitting there, it's always so beautiful and nice, but you still got no power because trees are down.
If you had a Ford EV Lightning, you could run your whole house for 3 to 10 days off of that truck.
Yeah, yep.
You're right.
Yep. That's I think we've talked about that in other sessions, and yeah, my wife wants me to go out and buy a Ford Lightning if they're ever available.
Like I said, the waiting list still isn't even open back up yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Well,
you ain't running your whole house for 3 to 10 days off that thing.
Well, speaking of that, let me jump into the powerboat thing here, because Tony had sent me some stuff. And I had this vision when they were talking about some of the batteries on these boats, these solar boats. You could run your home for like a month off of some of these. Of course, you'd be parking a $300,000 boat in your driveway to run your house. So
You're living on the boat at that point.
I know. Well, if it's a hurricane, you might need the boat.
Maybe it's the boat Joe Manson lives on.
Yeah, almost heaven, right? So yeah, we discussed this before, and Tony was nice enough to send me some links on some of the electric boats. And I think I need to differentiate between electric boats and solar boats, because some of these boats that I looked at have solar panels and are geared up for solar. Others are just simply electric motors that operate off batteries, and they could be charged by solar, or they could be charged by anything. So we've got, it's supposedly a $7.8 billion market, according to this, by 2028. The advantages, pretty clear cut, no fumes, quiet ride, all of that. The disadvantages that they're talking about is it may be slow and may be limited in range. You know, those are, although when I started looking at the details, that changes. Now, there was the first transatlantic solar boat trip was in 2007. So this is not a new thing. One of the cool ideas is that you can put enough solar panels on some of these that the range is unlimited as long as there's sunlight. You know, of course, the speed may be slow, who knows, but, and you may have to sit for a while waiting on sunlight. But the General Motors invested $150 million, company called Pure Watercraft. They're marketing electric pontoon boat. That's their first product that's out there. It's a single motor engine and a double motor. The single motor retails at $45,000. The dual motor retails at $60,000. And I was thinking, man, that's pretty high for a pontoon boat. But then I looked up to see what is a pontoon boat cost. And the average price of a pontoon boat is $41,000. So yeah, a little bit more, but fairly comparable.
Jay, did they do anything special with the batteries? I'm just curious. When I think of batteries and on anything on water, those two don't seem to be a real good combination. Every time I've been on a boat, everything's wet. Is there anything special about the batteries they mentioned?
No, I think most of these are just lithium ion.
Okay.
You know, and they did mention in some of the videos I looked at that safety is a big deal. They're considered much safer than perhaps a diesel powered vehicle. So so that's an issue. The speed, obviously, for a pontoon boat, you usually don't go skiing out behind a pontoon boat. So, but there are some other higher end ones. I know SpaceX team had a boat called Arc Boat, with investors like Will Smith and Sean Diddy Combs, all these. It's an LA-based thing. I was trying to think of something about a boat and slapping, but I couldn't think of that since Will Smith was the investor. Okay, so 24-foot, 220 kilowatt hour battery in that boat. 220, that's like 2 of those Ford Lightnings. 500 horsepower motor on it, 40 miles per hour. Retails at $300,000, so it better go fast. And there was a Spanish yacht company called Silent Yachts. This one actually has a 17 kW array on the top of it, the canopy of it. Starting at 2.4 million euros for that particular boat. So almost $3 million. And but then when we get into some of the issues around boats, and this is kind of gets a little bit more into the serious aspect of it, or why it's got a potential market or where it can help, is the oil and gas spills from boats are pretty dramatic. Currently with 2-cycle engines, they said that 20 to 30% of the gasoline used in that boat is not burned. It's released into the water during the combustion process. So right there, not even counting spills, leaks, things of that nature, 30% of the gas you put in the motor is by design going into the water, which is bad. When you look at miles per gallon, and I know with boats you don't really talk about miles per gallon, but even a typical pontoon boat, they said, gets about 5 gallons to the hour. And since these things go at about 5 miles per hour, you're talking about a gallon per mile. So the release of carbon dioxide, things of that nature, these are very inefficient vehicles, very polluting, a lot of CO2. In fact, they said that the CO2 emissions from boats, if boats were a country, it would be the 6th largest polluter in the world. So I always love when they do that, give everything a country. And cleaning solutions, that's an issue. Maintenance, one of the issues with maintenance is they did talk about yachts and boats and pleasure crafts. They say that you should anticipate 10% of the cost of the vehicle in maintenance and use cost over each year. So if you pay $2 million for a boat, figure $200,000 to use it that year. So with a pontoon boat, obviously 4,500, they're talking for the boat if that's 10%. With electric vehicles, there's very little maintenance. And where it was pointed out is a real good application of the whole solar boat thing is in ferry boats. And they've done a lot of studies in India where they've replaced some of the diesel ferry boats with solar ferry boats. And they found that the operational costs, when you include the cost of purchase, over a 20-year lifespan, it's about 1/3 of the cost currently of a diesel-powered ferry boat. So of all of the boat things, it seemed like ferry boats were currently economically a viable option. So I guess if you're in the boat manufacturing world, that would be a marketplace to look at immediately. Obviously, if somebody's going to pay $3 million for a yacht, they might be willing to pay that regardless of how economical it is. And noise pollution is another issue. And they were talking in some of the research, not only about scaring fish away if you're out fishing or whatever, but a lot of marine life, it disrupts their communication patterns, it disrupts their life, basically. And I guess in extreme cases, this marine life can go into shock from loud noises, and it's been known to kill marine mammals and marine life. So I think it's going to be a thing, obviously, as solar percolates, as everything becomes electrified. I think we're going to see electric boats not as a curiosity in the not too distant future, but as a real thing. So just like we're seeing electric vehicles, electric homes, or, you know, solar homes. So any comments on the whole world of electric boats? I know, Tony, you had brought this up. Are you guys going to go out and invest in solar boats now?
Yeah, maybe, you know, indirectly. Eventually I'll get there, but we're working with an investor and manufacturing partner out of Houston. That's where we're ultimately going to make our systems out of, in Houston. And they've gotten contacted by a company that wants them to make electric powertrains for boats. So part of the calculus here, you know, at least initially, is how do we apply what we're doing in our technology to the boat charging process. And then maybe from there, you know, it's something that I've always been interested in. It's interesting when we're talking about boats, right? Because there's not like this traditional pain point of price. And if you were buying a boat, you were making a horrible financial decision, and you know that going into it, right? Like you're talking about like thousands of dollars per enjoyable hour, right? When you factor in the cost of the boat, the maintenance, to dry dock it somewhere, take it out of dry dock, whatever, transport it somewhere, literally thousands of dollars per hour. So it's not as price sensitive, so that you could create a platform, and you saw some of those. I mean, some of the prices on there were some of them were actually pretty low, as you pointed out. But you could create an electric vehicle boat platform where price wasn't so much of an issue. And it's just driven by the next best thing, keeping up with the Joneses, and the next little spot over, for a better, cleaner, blah 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 blah, potentially faster solution. Like electric jet ski, I think would be pretty sick.
That's right. Yeah, especially with a parasail that's solar panels, you know.
As far as safety goes on boats, submarines have been doing batteries for 80 years. So that might be somebody you can look at some of the technology there.
I just wonder too how marinas would deal with the electric charging, because it's one thing to put a gas pump in and everybody sort of queues up and fills, but is it practical to run charging stations to every single dock? You know, at least in the marinas I'm familiar with, they're not that high end, you know, where if you've got $300,000 boats sitting there, probably not an issue. But if everybody's got pontoon boats and they just happen to be electric, is it practical to have places to charge them, you know, right there at the dock? Because you can't run cords, you know, 400 yards or something to your boat. So it's another market open to you. But again, with the pontoon boats, you got those canopies there where you can just have solar panels. And as you say, you don't use them that frequently. So you come up every week, you know, recharge them over the course of the week and use the power one day, you know, so they don't have to be huge.
As you were talking, I didn't hear you mention the use of hybrid technology in the boats. Small motors, just like in the Prius, good sized battery, buzz up the lake as fast as you want, and then sit for 2 hours drinking beer, which is what most people do anyway. So there you are. You can address the pollution by having more efficient, smaller motors, and you've got the power. You can plug it in, or you can gas it up.
Yeah, I did see some videos about hybrid, but mostly they talked about using the diesel generators on the boat to recharge the batteries, as opposed to having a motor, you know, an engine like in a Prius or something that would burn the fossil fuels directly, which makes sense so that you only have one electric drive train or drive shaft or corkscrew or whatever you call these things. What are they called? Drive screws? What are they? Oh, propeller. Well, that's screws. Part of it. Screw, yeah, something. So
I have a question. Could both be retrofitted to run on pure electric?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, I would have to think. I mean, they do have a little electric outboard motors, you know. So if it's just simply replacing the motor, you would think you could do that.
Okay, Tony, you have some, your business works with anything along the this concept of electrifying marine motorboats and stuff like that?
I'm on the kind of the inverter and the EV charging. But some of the things that we're working on right now, we're getting approached by not just like electric vehicles in the classic sense, but micro mobility solutions, so scooters and bikes and charging solutions for that. And then also this opportunity for larger vehicles such as boats kind of fell into our lap. So it's still early in that, but it's always been something that I've looked at because there's not really, I mean, pure watercraft is probably the closest thing, but there's not really an apex predator in the electric boat space. So it's a pretty big market, and there's no like 800-pound gorilla that's like super dominant right now.
The reason I asked, our company is a company we call Budget Marines, which is located in Trinidad. They serve the marine industry in Trinidad with the pleasure craft. So I mean, here Jane, you talking about this, and if it's something I want to explore to see if I could bring it to Trinidad, I don't know how to approach it, maybe from products and services. So I was asking if your business or company deals with these kind of solutions. Someday I could probably talk to you on a bit more detail to get some ideas on it. To see
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're at the end of our hour here. So I appreciate everybody's attention. And if you have any questions during the week, send them to me and we'll try and address them. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Jane.
Bye-bye.